The six-day war in the Middle East between Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria is underway. A spy ship, very lightly armed, but bristling with antennae, steams into the Mediterranean to eavesdrop on the conflict. With the war reaching its climax, Israeli jets and motor torpedo boats launch an unprovoked attack on the ship. They drop napalm and strafe its decks with rockets, cannon fire, and armor-piercing rounds before trying to sink it with torpedoes.
We had no way to defend ourselves, and we're just slaughtered.
And they shot up the life rafts that were put into the water, and they shot the ones that were still on board the ship.
Throughout the attack, the ship flies the Stars and Stripes, the flag of the United States of America. Its name, the USS Liberty, is freshly painted on its stern.
If the Israelis had succeeded in sinking the ship without leaving any witnesses or survivors, Egypt would have been accused of the crime and the United States would have been drawn into the war and sided with Israel.
In a presentation to surviving USS Liberty crewmen, journalist Peter Hougham reports the intended purpose of the Operation Cyanide false flag was to create an excuse and pretext to launch a joint Israeli-U.S. nuclear strike against Egypt. President Nasser of Egypt was squarely in Israel's crosshairs. Multiple countries were on a hair-trigger alert for a global nuclear war.
What happened to you guys on June the 8th, 1967 was actually a seminal moment in world history. And yet the true story has been buried by your government. And the reason is that what happened was so shaming, not just to Israel, but to America too. Only by a hair's breadth did the world avoid a nuclear exchange. The superpowers nearly led us into a Third World War. From late 1966 onwards, there were U.S. military personnel, experts, stationed in Tel Aviv, helping with Operation Cyanide and planning for a forthcoming war against Egypt. In other words, it wasn't to defend Israel from an attack by Egypt. It was to promote an attack by Israel on Egypt. Their objective was to launch an invasion of Jordan and grab territory in the West Bank and the old city of Jerusalem, which was considered historical areas of the Jews. By the time the Liberty reached its position close to the Egyptian coast, Israel had conquered the Sinai. Its troops were close to the Suez Canal. Underneath Liberty, there was a Polaris submarine, the USS Andrew Jackson, which had followed your ship all the way from Spain. But remember, a submarine like that has only one purpose, and that is to strike against an enemy with nuclear weapons in the event of a nuclear war. As the attack unfolded and the Sixth Fleet got a message from the Liberty that you were being attacked, instead of sending planes to your rescue, they started a counterattack on Cairo. Nuclear-armed planes were dispatched from the USS America, a huge aircraft carrier, to bomb Cairo. So these planes, launched from the USS America, reached within 3 minutes of dropping these nuclear weapons on Cairo. We know that from several sources. They were well over Egyptian territory when an order came through for them to urgently return to base. A panic-stricken Robert McNamara and his president, Lyndon Johnson, came on the line and ordered the recall. Altogether, 50 planes were dispatched towards Egypt. And after their recall, every one had to be counted in. It is reminiscent of Dr. Strangelove. Added to this, a powerful amphibious landing force was dispatched to land near El Alamein, and you could only assume that they were due to head for Cairo too. When it had to be recalled, it was clear the mission was a fiasco. But of course, it was also an outrage, because Egypt had not conducted the attack on the Liberty, it was the Israelis. It's quite well known now that Israel had been attempting to complete its first nuclear weapon out Dimona, their secret nuclear weapons plant, in the Negev desert. By the summer of 1967, the CIA had intelligence that a bomb was near completion. As your ship neared its position, I now can say that this nuclear weapon was ready to be detonated. you were going to be in the fallout zone of where the bomb was going to go off. And it nearly did go off. There were teams in Israel ready to fly in helicopters with this device and detonate it in place. It was a suicide mission because they didn't have timing mechanisms for the bomb. They had to run a very long wire, nearly a mile, to a detonator and set it off themselves. And of course, being a mile from a bomb like that was likely to end in their deaths. Again, it's got shades of Dr. Strangelove. One of the brave volunteers who was due to go on the mission has spoken to me in detail, and he had something to say. This man understood that the bomb was going to be detonated on a mountain in the Sinai Desert. The operation to place a bomb in Egypt was called Operation Samson, which indicates it was a sort of suicide mission, a last-ditch measure. And some of these people have indicated that the Americans knew about it, that they knew what Israel was up to. We must consider whether this was another reason why USS Liberty was sent close to the proposed blast area. Or is it just a bizarre coincidence? I doubt it. It is no exaggeration to say that we were close to World War III. America's Strategic Air Command was controlled from a huge underground nerve center in Arizona. Its role was to launch a nuclear blitzkrieg on Russia and China. Its primary means of doing that were B-52 nuclear-armed bombers. Before the Liberty attack, these bombers were put on high alert. I interviewed a pilot of a B-52 who was on high alert in California, and he was placed in that position before the Liberty attack. We also know that in Arizona, at SAC headquarters, similar measures were in place. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the involvement of the SAC suggests that other countries should well have known what was going on, because launching a nuclear war involved NATO. And the involvement of SAC suggests America and Israel were not the only countries that might have been involved in events of that period. SAC was, of course, hooked into NATO, which was based in Europe. NATO was led by an American General Lemnitzer, who also had a second job, which was being in charge of US forces in Europe, including the Mediterranean. These countries, members of NATO, probably knew something about this emergency and are also holding secrets about the Six-Day War. Britain was in a perfect position to keep an eye on what was going on. It had amazing electronic listening facilities in Cyprus. One crucial piece of evidence came to me recently, and that is that a squadron of Lightning aircraft, which were trained and designed to counter a Soviet nuclear attack, were on high alert in Cyprus for the whole duration of the Six-Day War. So what did Britain know about the Six-Day War that they've never told us about? Further supporting evidence is that British intelligence agents were working alongside American personnel in Israel as part of Operation Sinai in 1966, planning the war against Egypt. How do I know this? I have interviewed people who were there who confirm it. This is such a complex story. It is understandable we are still searching for answers. But even after more than 50 years, it is vitally important that we keep searching, not just from a historical perspective, but because it still has a bearing on modern world problems, not least the Palestinian problem. I want to end with another story. In the early 60s, long before the Six-Day War, a plan called Operation Northwards was drawn up by the Pentagon. The idea was to blacken the character of Fidel Castro, label the country, Cuba, as an aggressor, and create a casus belli, a justification for America launching an attack on the country. When Operation Northwards was brought to Kennedy in the Oval Office, he was horrified. It had numerous black ops that he strongly disapproved of. The man who brought that plan to him was General Lyman Lemnitzer, the guy who was in charge of US forces in Europe during the Six-Day War. Kennedy was so furious that within months he had Lemnitzer dispatched to Europe. He considered him to be a highly dangerous man. He was a hawk, virulently anti-communist, and prepared to do almost anything to get rid of the Soviet Union, including launch a nuclear war. The Northwoods Plan proposed many provocations, but one in particular is relevant. It recommended that an American ship should be sailed into Havana harbor where it would blow up. This would then be blamed on Cuba, giving an excuse to America to invade. The idea, as far as the Joint Chiefs of Staff were concerned, and Lemnitzer in particular, the use of nukes were not off the agenda in that eventuality. We therefore must ask whether the attack on the Liberty was modelled on these sort of dirty tricks tactics, because they are so similar in terms of the detail. You only have to see what has been happening in Gaza in the last month to see that what happened in the Six-Day War has had ramifications all through the decades. The plight of the Palestinians is still the same. The story has not yet ended.